Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you enjoyed uh, the 2020 version of Philanthropy Day. I'm happy to be here as the moderator for this breakout session. My name is Larry Terry. I'm the Executive Director of the Weldon Cooper Center for Public Service at UVA, and also a proud CME board member. And so it was great to be a part of today's event, and I really like the idea of having the post-panel discussion because much like Philanthropy Day in years past, we really get to enjoy sort of the side conversations that I think really lift us all up in many ways as we sort of debrief the event. So I'm happy to be a part of this post panel event and to have extend this conversation with Melissa that she so eloquently guided us through over the past 45 minutes during Philanthropy Day. So I think by virtue of process and people wanting to engage, I think we have the chat function, which hopefully I will not screw up. But so we can engage in that way and ask the conversations. And Dr. Thomas Hunt, it's a good, I'm really happy to meet you and learn more about what you're doing at Airbnb. And just this whole notion of belonging, I think, is a really important one and maybe has come to the forefront of all the things that we've experienced over the past year, if not longer, for sure. And so I think what I'll do is I'll kick it off with one question, just as people's minds sort of get going here and they think about things that they may want to ask here in the coming moments. But can you, one of the things that was mentioned in the discussion that we just left was this notion of how do we move from discussion to action? And just this week, I was reading an article that I found on LinkedIn that I thought was really, really interesting, where it said for the past year in particular, we've engaged in a lot of discussion and self-reflection, and a lot of people, almost making the statement that I'm going through a journey. How do we take what we've gone through, the discussion portion, which I think is important? How do we go from the journey, but not let it stop at just the self-reflective journey, but actually take it into the journey of work? Just sort of how I framed it in my mind. Can you just expand on that a little bit more? Because I think your own journey probably has a lot to say about that.
So, for those of us and all of us have areas where we feel less comfortable, where our own lived experiences don't give us insight into the marginalized experience of others. And the first commitment is that we're going to do as much to learn that we possibly can on our own. And then where there are questions, engaging others. But at some point, that learning has to translate to action. But if we think of it as like big action, that's really overwhelming. So we have to think about like, what are the small things on a day-to-day basis that we can do? What are the ways that we can show up? And part of that is a reflection with our new knowledge of the ways in which we haven't shown up in the way that we wanted to previously. What would we do differently? And so when a situation emerges that resembles that, having a different script. And the thing is that these are always challenging situations. They run the risk of, our fear of ostracizing someone, of putting someone in a defensive posture. And so it takes sustained practice so that we become more comfortable with it, we can sit with it. And so it may actually make sense for us to look to the people who are closest to us in our lives, where those relationships are strong and intact, because there are always things that get said, but that's the place to practice. What are the words that I want to use? How do I want to stand up for someone? How do I want to indicate that someone got talked over, or that I want to call out that this is not a representative sample? That do I want to ask the question, who's not here, and what are the implications of it? But if we practice in smaller, safer places, that when we get to sort of the big dance, or where it's our work environment and there's more at stake, that we will feel more comfortable in moving forward. And just to continue to do that, to almost have like, what's that reminder that I'm going to have on my computer screen, on my desk? That's the thing that says, have I done a little bit more today? What could I do?
Yeah, I really like that answer as well, because I think even the smallest of actions matter because they add up over time. And so how do we make that commitment as individuals to do our part, because like I said, in the aggregate, they all certainly can make a difference. So thank you for that answer. And I wanted to kick it off just to get maybe people's ideas going, and I'm sure that people have other thoughts that they'd like to share. So if you haven't shared it in the chat, feel free to also unmute and ask Dr. Thomas Hunt a question if you like. And I'll pause here just so I don't get in anybody's way. Does anyone have a question that they'd like to ask? And by my count, it's 109. So I know we have maybe 6 or 7 minutes left. Any questions?
I'd like to ask a question.
All right.
Ms. Hunt, it's a pleasure to meet you, especially since I am a Airbnb host, so really love meeting you. But no, I wanted to say that how do you deal with when you have people in your organization or in other organizations that you may work with, where because it's not their lived experience, they minimize or they just kind of gloss over what's happening in the world, as though, you know, say members of their Black team members are not feeling that pain. You know, like for instance, after George Floyd, you know, some people came to work on that Monday and it's like, okay, let's get our, you know, meeting going. And their Black team members were really like, you know, they were really feeling it deeply, yet once again, and how, you know, so how do you encourage those team members to be able to have a conversation with maybe their superior that just doesn't get it?
So that's really hard. And I hate to put it on the individual to have to share their experience and be extra vulnerable, so that others have a window into their world. And let's be clear, it's not their responsibility. However, if one has the capacity to share, it can be incredibly powerful, because as humans, we connect to one another. And when we hear one another's stories, particularly from someone we know, when we get a window into something they have experienced or something that they have felt or been on the receiving end that we had no idea, it can be powerful. I'll give an example. So I was in San Francisco with my family, my husband, Brian, and my 3 kind of older-ish children, in late May. And it was a tough time at the company. So, 12 and 14 hours Zoom calls. We made some really tough decisions about our workforce. And then on top of that, I remember looking up and seeing the news and seeing George Floyd and the officer's knee on. And I remember that, but I actually didn't even process it, right? There was also the birder in Central Park and the police being called. For some reason, that became more salient. And I remember my husband, he was our go to the store while we were sheltering in place. And I remember calling and saying, when you come back, I need to get out. I don't know why, I need to get out. And he came and we drove around. And then it was actually later that evening that the head of the person of our Black employee resource group, with whom I have a personal relationship, reached out and said, Melissa, they actually call me MTH, we want to know how you feel. And it was in that moment that I realized that I had subjugated, like I had pushed down what I had witnessed. And so I wrote to the employee resource group, and I said, I'm here to support you. And I was having my own experience that wouldn't even let me be in a place to help you. And let me tell you about that experience. And part of that was I live with 3 Black men, one who's 6'2", the other one who is probably 6'2.5", although my husband doesn't admit that my youngest is a little taller than he is, and then my 19-year-old, and my daughter as well. And living in San Francisco in particular, but we could have been anywhere in the world, when they would go out for a socially distanced walk, and masks were a big thing early in San Francisco. My daughter, she said to me, Mom, I worry about them because not only do we stand out, but now they can't even see their faces. And so I ended up sharing my note that I wrote to the Black Employee Resource Group with my executive team, with the executive team. And as a means of their understanding what my own personal experience was, someone with they sit with week after week and make company-wide decisions, but that they don't necessarily have that window in. And so when you can muster it, it can be incredibly powerful. And they actually I got immediate responses, and they wanted to step up, and they shared things with me that they otherwise would not have shared. So I would say, to the extent that one can, it's very powerful, but one's not obligated to do it.
Well, that's great. That's a really powerful story. I see we're up against our time here. I just want to see if maybe we have time for one more question. Christine, can we throw one more in there? Okay, just so we got to start a few minutes late. I want to shortchange us here on the exchange. So any last question we really feel eager to ask here before we go? Anyone, feel free to unmute if you like.
Melissa, I have a question. This is Christine, if no one else does.
Okay.
And that question is this. So one of the things that we hear, particularly in the business, the private, the corporate sector, is a question of whose work is racial equity work. And in the nonprofit sector, I think sometimes there's this impression that social justice work is done by advocacy groups or organizations that have social justice in their names or in their missions, but not necessarily in their work plans. And so I wonder if you, from your perch at Airbnb, if you have some advice or guidance for talking with people in the for-profit sector to understand why the work of justice and moving against systemic oppression really has to be everybody's business.
It has to be everybody's. And from conversations with the CEO and the CFO and the rest of the executive team, down to other leaders and managers, and then to just employees who are in the organization, we've been really vigilant about our allyship training and supporting individuals in helping to find their voice. No one person can be in every single place. And so it's the responsibility of each of us, wherever we are, to advocate for social justice, to try and create a world where there is equity, where individuals can be recognized and respected and valued wherever that is. And if we leave it to other people or to specific organizations, we're just not going to get there. We'll move forward, but it just won't be at the accelerated rate that we can go forward and fast if we're all trying to do even just a little of our part.
Thank you.
Thank you for the extra time, and thank you all for joining us here in the breakout room. Dr. Thomas Hunt, thank you again for your great insight, and keep up the good work. And please stay connected with all of us and let us know if there's anything we can do for you as you continue in your work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Larry.
Right.
And thank you so much. It's great to see all the faces. I was scrolling, looking to see. Lots of love to all of you.
Great.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
Be well, everyone.
Great. Thanks. Great event, everybody.